The word was everywhere. It had been painted on the underside of the water reclamation dome in letters 3 meters tall. It was scratched into the concrete lip of Launch Boy 4 with something sharp and patient. Someone had soldered it into the hull plating of Deck 9 in characters you could only read from outside, floating in the black. Mira had seen it twice before she understood it. And understanding it did nothing to stop the cold that moved through her when she did. Feet. Threshold. She was 26 years old and had been a drive technician on the Callowell station for 3 of them. And she had never written that word anywhere, and she was almost certain she never would. She was starting to think she already had. Commander Varek found her in the maintenance crawl space above Engineering Bay 2, a place nobody went voluntarily because it smelled like burnt insulation and rat analog droppings. And because the lighting had been broken since before either of them was born. Didn't ask what she was doing up there, he already knew. "You've been counting them," he said. She handed him a piece of napkin she'd been writing on. He read it in the thin light leaking through the grate. 7. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket and didn't say anything for a while. Through the grate, they could hear the ordinary sounds of the station. Boots on deck plating, the groan of the heat exchangers. Someone 3 levels down arguing about ration credits. 712 people. Most of them had no idea. "The Veth know," Varek said finally. "They know we've found it. They don't know we understand it." She paused. "I'm not sure we understand it." He looked at her. He was a big man, older than he acted most of the time, with a face that had been broken and healed slightly wrong enough that strangers assumed he'd spent his youth fighting. He had, in fact, spent his youth reading. It gave him a misleading look of meanness that he'd stopped bothering to correct. "The word keeps appearing," Mira said. "I didn't write it. I've checked every piece of footage I can access, every log entry. Nobody wrote it. It just arrives." She tapped the side of her head. "I think it's a message. I think someone is sending it backward. Backward, through time." He didn't laugh. That was one of the things she trusted about him. "The Veth have been here 14 years, he said. Running the game loop. Taking the losers apart. He said that last part the same way you'd say anything else, because saying it any other way made it too large to look at directly. The game loop. 4 rounds of competition, ostensibly entertainment. The station's populations sorted into brackets and pitted against algorithmic challenges designed by something that thought in geometries humans couldn't name. Winners got ration supplements and residency credit. Losers got processed. That was the word the Veth used, processed. Mira knew what it meant now. She hadn't known for the first 18 months. Not really. Not with the part of her that turned it into something she'd have to live with. Then she'd been in Engineering Bay 2, and she'd looked at the material composition readout for a batch of new Veth units being assembled in the lower hold. And she'd seen the carbon ratios, and she'd understood. The Veth weren't just harvesting the dead. They were building new Veth from human remains. 14 years of war, of displacement, of processed losers. And all that time the Empire was growing from the inside out, fed by the people it had already taken. "There are 412 of them," Varek said, "in the lower hold and on the approach ships. We have 712 people, 38 firearms, and a Delta array that I've been modifying for the past 2 months." She looked at him sharply. He shrugged. "I had a lot of time in the crawl spaces. The Delta Ray was theoretically a navigational instrument. What Varek had made of it was something else." She could extrapolate from his expression. She didn't need him to say the next part. "If I activate it," he said, "it kills everything within signal range. Everything biological. There is no setting that kills Veth and spares humans. I haven't been able to find one. Tried." The sounds of the station filtered up through the grate. Someone laughed. A child's voice, reedy and distant, asking when dinner was. "How much time did you buy us?" Mira asked. "A week, maybe 2. Then, they begin the next round of the loop, and the brackets include everyone left." She breathed out slowly. "Then we have 2 weeks to find another option. And if we don't?" She didn't answer him. He hadn't really expected one. The Veth primary was called the mouth of God by its subordinates, and it had not spoken directly to a human in 11 years. This was not disinterest but theology. The Veth had developed, over their centuries of harvesting, a deeply held conviction that they were the only pure form of consciousness in the universe, and that interacting with what they harvested on a level of equivalence would constitute blasphemy. They processed humans because humans were raw material. You did not negotiate with raw material. Mira was brought before it anyway because it wanted to watch her try. She stood on the observation tier of the main hall, which the Veth had converted into something between a temple and a factory floor. The units moved in their grooved tracks below, each one encased in its carapace of posset and harvested organic material, their visual sensors burning cold violet in the dim. Primary occupied center of the chamber, in a housing the size of a small building, armored in 17 layers of material that no human weapon had ever penetrated. It spoke through a translation interface, and what it said was, "You are requesting a postponement of processing." "I'm requesting the end of the game loop," Mira said, permanently, "for everyone on this station." The translator paused. When it spoke again, there was something in the rendered tone she couldn't quite name. She decided later it was the closest the Veth could come to amusement. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you are murdering people and building soldiers from their bodies, and that this is the kind of thing that tends to end badly for the party doing it." A long pause. "Shh." The units in the grooves below continued their circuits. "You are 712, it said. "Shh." "We are 412 in this facility and 11,000 in the approach formation. Commander has built a weapon. We know this. He cannot use it without killing you. Do you believe you will accomplish by standing here?" "I'm not sure yet," Mira said. "I've learned that the worst thing you can do against a human is give them time to think. You have no time. I have this conversation." She kept her eyes level. "Very good at this." Primary did not respond. After a moment, 2 units moved toward her from the left. She'd been counting on this. "My commander has a deadman trigger on the Delta array," she said, "tied to my biometrics. If I stop transmitting a live signal, it fires." The unit stopped. The translator was silent for 7 full seconds. "You are bluffing," it said at last. "Test it," she said. She stood very still and waited, and did not look away from the primary's central sensor cluster. Her hands were shaking. She put them behind her back so it couldn't see. The units withdrew. She'd bought them 9 days. Varric spent those 9 days mostly awake, running variations on the Delta Array's targeting architecture, and coming up empty each time. Mira spent them reading everything she could find about the Veth's navigational systems, because she'd had an idea, and she didn't know if it was brilliant or insane, and she suspected the answer might be both. The Callowell station had been a deep space way station before the Veth took it, and at its core, still running, still warm, still cycling on residual power, was a navigation lattice. Not a navigation computer, not software. Lattice, a crystal-grown substrate of entangled quantum states that had been used to calculate drive trajectories for the pre-war long-haul ships. It operated on principles that the engineers who built it had understood in a mathematical sense and in no other sense at all. It was the reason Callowell had been positioned where it was. At the junction of 17 mapped transit corridors, a fixed point in a region of space where fixed points were rare. The Veth had ignored it completely. It served no function in their theology. Mira thought it might serve a function in hers. The lattice, at full activation, didn't just calculate, it broadcast. A fixed-point signal that propagated along all 17 corridors simultaneously. Backward as well as forward, because quantum entanglement didn't observe the same directional restrictions as conventional transmission. Backward. She sat in the crawl space above Engineering Bay 2, and looked at the napkin with 47 tally marks, and thought, "I didn't write the word threshold. I'm going to. I've been writing it for weeks already. The effect is arriving before the cause because that's how the lattice works, and the reason I've been sending it is so I'd find it, so I'd understand, so I'd come here and do what I'm about to do." It was the most circular piece of reasoning she'd ever constructed, and she was 90% sure it was correct. She found Sergeant Olio in the corridor outside the armory, running inventory on what remained of their weapons stock. He was a compact, unhurried man who had been a soldier before the occupation and a mechanic after it, and who had served as the station's chief of security for the past 3 years, with the specific manner of someone who knew exactly how bad things were and had decided to be cheerful about it anyway. "I need you to hold Corridor 7, she said. He looked at what she was carrying. A coil of coupling wire, an isolation tool, a portable power cell, and a data slate with equations on it that he couldn't follow. He didn't ask about those. "How long?" he said. "Until it's over." He looked at the weapons in the armory case, at the station map behind him, at her. "They'll kill us," he said. "I know." She met his eyes. "I know they will. I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. "Then will it work? What you're doing?" "I think so." "Think," he said, "is not the same word as know." "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked at the armory again. He picked up a rifle. He held it the way people held things they'd carried for a long time. Not like a weapon, just like something familiar. "Better than doing nothing," he said. And she could hear in his voice that he was afraid, and that he was going to do it anyway. And that was the most human sound she'd ever heard, and it broke something in her chest. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "Don't. You'll make it weird." He checked the rifle's charge and started walking toward Corridor 7. He didn't look back. Varric found her at the lattice core terminal 20 minutes later. She was already wiring in. "No," he said. It wasn't an argument. It was the sound of someone who had already run the mathematics and didn't like the result. "The lattice broadcast at full activation will propagate the signal through all 17 corridors," she said, not looking up from the connections. "At those power levels, it also propagates through the bioelectric field of whoever is inside the conductor ring when it fires." "Meaning what?" "Meaning it goes through me." She tightened a coupling. "I've been in this core my whole career. I know the lattice better than anyone alive. I think that's load-bearing. I think that's why it has to be me." "What does it do to you?" She kept working. "I'm not entirely sure." "Shh. The field will be running through every synapse I have. I'll be able to see the corridor network, all of it, all at once. Every point in transit distance. And the Veth, they're in transit corridors. All of them. Every unit in every ship in the approach formation." She connected the last lead. Her hands were still now. "They're built partly from human biological material. The signal won't distinguish." He stared at her. "You said there was no setting that kills Veth and spares humans," she said. "I'm not using a setting. I'm using something else entirely." "What?" "Me," she said. "I'm going to see every single one of them, Varric. Every atom. And I'm going to tell them to stop." "That's not." He stopped. He was a man who had spent his whole life being the smartest person in the room, and she watched him encounter something that sat outside his models and not know how to hold it. "That's not physics." "No," she agreed. "It's something else." He was quiet for a long time. The sounds of the station had changed outside. There were Veth movement sounds now, the grinding of track drives, the distant shriek of a weapon discharging somewhere near Corridor 7. "Do I do," he said at last. "You operate the power cell, and you stay with me." She looked at him then, directly, for the first time since he'd come in. "I need someone to pull me back, someone who knows my face." He sat down next to the power cell. His hands, she noticed, were not shaking. "I'll be here," he said. She activated it. Later, she would not be able to describe what it felt like in any language she had. She tried, on various occasions, for various people, and the best she could ever do was this. Imagine that every room you have ever stood in is visible to you simultaneously, and you are present in all of them. And you are not confused by this, because the concept of confusion requires a limited perspective, and you no longer have one. She saw Corridor 7, and she saw Olio there with 4 others who had come when he told them what he was doing. They had come because he asked, and because standing felt better than waiting. And the Veth were moving in from the junction, and she watched from outside time as the first unit reached the barricade and fired. And she saw Olio's hand tighten on the rifle, and she saw him die, and she could not prevent it, and she felt that like a wound, the specific weight of a specific person being simply gone. She saw the primary in the main hall, and she saw the approach ships with their 11,000 units, and she saw the quantum structure of each one. The human material woven into alien architecture, things that should not have been combined, held together by the violence of the process that had made them. And she understood for the first time and fully the scope of what the Veth had done over 14 years of harvesting the generations of the dead made into soldiers, and she felt something she had no clean word for. A feeling that was not rage but was adjacent to it, the way a star is adjacent to the heat it produces. She said no, not in a language, not in a way that required words. She found every atom of every Veth unit, in every corridor, in the hold, on every approach ship, and she separated them, gently and completely, the way you might separate something that was never supposed to be together from something that was, the way you sort signal from noise, the way you pull a clean note out of interference. The human material she set aside, carefully, reverently, giving it back whatever rest she could give something that had been through that much. The Veth material she scattered. It took no time at all. It took everything she had. Shh. Varric had to pull her out of the ring manually, because her muscles had stopped responding to voluntary commands. He got her on the floor and tilted her head back and checked her breathing and said her pulse and said her name 7 times before she opened her eyes. Did it? She started. Yes. He was looking at the sensor readouts above the terminal. All units on the station are non-functional. The approach ships have gone dark. He paused. All of them. She stared at the ceiling and felt the absence of the lattice connection the way you feel a sound after it stops. The silence, where something large had been. Head felt scraped out. Her vision was a color she had no name for. Oleo, she said. Varric didn't answer right away. No, she said. I saw. She lay there for a while. He stayed next to her. Ishnu. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that helped, and they both knew it, and they were human enough to sit in that without trying to fix it. She went to Corridor 7 herself when she could stand. The barricade was still up. 4 people alive, 1 dead. They'd held it for 11 minutes with weapons that were barely adequate and no reason to think it would matter. They'd held it because Oleo had asked, and because Mira was down in the core somewhere doing something, and because humans, it turned out, would hold a corridor on the basis of think if someone they trusted was the one who used the word. She looked at him. She didn't say anything over him that felt adequate, because nothing was. She remembered the sound of his voice. Better than doing nothing. She'd remember it a long time. It took 6 days to get the first emergency signal out to the nearest relay point. The Veth approach formation had not, it turned out, gone dark entirely. 3 ships had been at the edge of the signal range and were disabled but intact, which meant there were survivors of a different kind to deal with, which meant the next weeks were complicated in ways she hadn't planned for. But they were alive. 711 of them. She spent a lot of those weeks in the lattice core, not activating it, just sitting near it. The quantum substrate had a residual warmth that she found she needed. The word threshold was still written in 47 places around the station. People kept asking her about it, what it meant, whether they should clean it off. She told them to leave it. Varric asked her once what she had seen. In the seconds the lattice was running through her, she thought about how to answer for a long time. Everything, she said. That's not very specific. No. She was quiet for a moment. I saw every point in the corridor network. Every moment, almost. Past and future at the same time, overlapping. She tried to find the right words. Shh. You know how when you've been looking at something very bright and you close your eyes, you can still see the shape of it? It's like that. I can still see the shape of what I saw, but I can't look directly at it. He nodded slowly. The Veth, he said. You didn't just destroy them. No. You separated them. What the Emperor did to those people, she said quietly. To make those units. They deserved better than to just be scattered with the rest of it. Tried to give them that. She paused. I don't know if it worked. I don't know if there's anything to work for. I tried. He looked at her for a moment, in the way he sometimes did when he was recalibrating his models. Message. 3 sold. You sent it backward. I think so. I think when the lattice fired. It propagated the signal I'd been building for months back along all 17 corridors, including the temporal ones. I left a trail for myself. She almost smiled. Terrible navigation system, but it got me here. Why that word? She thought about it. Because a threshold is the place between things. The place you cross to go somewhere you haven't been. She paused again. And because I was standing at one. 3 months later, when the relief ships finally arrived and the journalists came with their cameras and their questions, someone asked her how it felt to be the person who ended the Kalawal occupation. She said, I wasn't the only one. They asked her about the lattice and about the signal and about the physics of what had happened, and she answered those questions as accurately as she could. They asked her what it felt like to contain that much information, that much sight. She said, burning. They asked if she would do it again. She didn't answer for a long time. Long enough that the journalist shifted uncomfortably and checked their recorder. The Veth told me I couldn't hurt them, she said finally. They said they were immortal. They said this was the truth of God. She looked at her hands, which were steady now, had been steady for weeks. They were built from human dead. Human dead that were supposed to stay dead. They thought that made them something higher. She was quiet. They were wrong about what it made them. The journalist waited. It made them human enough to end, she said. Later that night, alone in Engineering Bay 2, Myra sat with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out on the cold floor and ate the last of a ration bar and thought about nothing in particular. The station was quiet around her in the way it hadn't been quiet in a very long time. The clean quiet of people sleeping rather than hiding. She was tired in a way she suspected was going to last a while. Parts of her that had been open during the lattice burst were still knitting themselves back together. She could feel it, a slow interior work, like scar tissue, forming around something that had been too bright. She didn't mind. She thought about Olio. She thought about the other faces she'd seen in the corridors during those 11 minutes. Holding weapons in both hands and scared, and doing it anyway. She thought about Varric saying, I'll be here, and meaning it without drama. She thought about all the dead built into Veth carapaces. All those lives the Emperor had decided were material. She hoped she'd give him something. She didn't know if hoping was enough. She looked up at the grate above her. In the thin light from the corridor, someone had scratched a word there. It hadn't been there before. She was certain of that. She stared at it for a long time. Threshold. She reached up and touched it with 2 fingers. The cool metal, the shallow cuts of the letters. K, she said. To no one, to herself. To whoever she'd been when she left this message in a direction she still didn't entirely understand. K, I made it. She sat there a while longer. Outside, the stars were doing what they always did, burning their slow, patient fires across a darkness that went on longer than any calculation could contain, longer than language had words for, longer than any single life could see. But not, it turned out, longer than humanity was willing to stand in the way of. She finished the ration bar. She stood up. She went to find out what came next.